Let me first talk about this trade from the Atlanta's Falcons aspect. First, I want to say shouts out to both the Atlanta Falcons and Matt Ryan, because one thing that you saw is Atlanta did it right. You don't see that a lot because, of course, usually companies or NFL or teams, they try to put their best interest first. And while you could have got a lot more for Matt Ryan, I think they traded him for like a third round pick or something like that. They did what was best for him, which was send him to a team where he can contend, which is Indy. But let's talk about Matt Ryan in Atlanta for a second. I heard several things. Now, I heard a lot of excitement coming from this trade. A lot of people thank God Matt Ryan's finally gone, or we couldn't do nothing with Matt Ryan. Matt Ryan's trash. Matt Ryan's been garbage. Matt Ryan this, Matt Ryan that. Matt Ryan's cooked. Matt Ryan's washed up. Matt Ryan's terrible. Let me put on a true perspective of Matt Ryan's tenure in Atlanta. I've said this before, and Atlanta is no different. Fans, which is of course short for fanatic, have an irrational belief or irrational feeling for their team, or irrational glasses for their team. Let me be honest about what Matt Ryan is still a good quarterback. What Matt Ryan was doing, however, and I don't think that he's able to do anymore, is he was taking less talented rosters and making them better. You can be good at something, but you may not be good enough to take a roster that is not good and elevate it, i.e. Deshaun Watson. Deshaun Watson was so good that he was taking a poor roster, that is the Houston Texans, and raising them up to a level that they played in the playoffs games, and was even up like 20 points against the Kansas City Chiefs one year. Deshaun Watson's talent was so good. You were able to overlook the fact that Houston is a terrible, terrible roster. I mean, terrible, roster. And you saw the year that he didn't play, how bad they looked. Or the 2 years that they didn't play, how bad they looked. I'm not saying that the Kansas City Chiefs is a bad roster, but Patrick Mahomes is so good that he's able to take a roster and elevate it, even if they're bad. And again, I'm not saying the Kansas City Chiefs roster is bad, but that's how good Patrick Mahomes is. Cam Newton was like that in 2015, while the Panthers' defense was incredible. The year that, of course, they went 15-1 and they lost in the Super Bowl. Cam Newton, look at the receivers that he was throwing to. But Cam Newton was so dynamic and that defense was so good that he was able to take the roster and level it up. Matt Ryan is still a good quarterback. Matt Ryan still has a cannon of an arm. If you look, even though I think they finished 7-10, he still had like a 90 passer rating. I think he had like 20 or 20 something touchdowns to like 12 interceptions. Matt Ryan is still a good quarterback. The problem is, and what Atlanta Falcons fans don't really understand, or some of them don't understand, is he's not good enough to elevate that roster. Because if you look at that roster, it is a horrible roster. And honestly, they haven't been good in some time. Yes, you've had Julio Jones, but Julio Jones has been in and out the lineup for a while now due to injury, which is actually the biggest reason why the Tennessee Titans cut him. He hasn't been able to stay healthy for a while now. Of course, Calvin Ridley, we know about the gambling thing, which happened last year, but of course, Calvin Ridley has been a little inconsistent. He's been good. Do not get me wrong. I'm not here bashing Calvin Ridley, but he hasn't been a number one. Now, of course, he hasn't had to be with Julio Jones, but like I just said, Julio Jones been in and out the lineup. They've whiffed on running backs. They have Kyle Pitts, but before Kyle Pitts, they whiffed on tight ends outside of Tony Gonzalez. Atlanta, their defense has been god awful. Like, yes, you had Dan Quinn, who was the coach and who was a defensive minded coach, was the architect behind the Legion of Boom, but they were terrible. Atlanta has been bad for a while, and Matt Ryan is not good enough to take a bad roster and bring them up and elevate them to be good. Is Matt Ryan still a good quarterback? Yes. And I think it was a win-win for both the Atlanta Falcons and the Indianapolis Colts. And we'll talk about that in a second. But do I think Matt Ryan is still a good quarterback? Yes, I think Matt Ryan is really good. I just think being, 37, 38 years old, he is not able to elevate a roster. He's able to be good. Matt Ryan, in my opinion, is in that boat where there a lot has to be right. A lot has to be right for him to succeed. The offensive line has to be good. You have to have good, solid pieces, good, solid weapons. You have to have a good defense. That's the realm that I think Matt Ryan is at this point of his career. But he's still a good quarterback. Now, do I think him going to Indy is like Tom Brady going to the Bucs? No. Do I think that him going to Indy is like Matt Stafford going to the Rams? No. Like, meaning, do I think that with Matt Ryan going to Indianapolis, it's just an automatic championship? Of course not. But I do think that Indy is a great place for him, which is why I said in the beginning that I appreciate what Atlanta did, because Atlanta could have sent that man anywhere. But they sent him to the place where he wanted to be, and it was a good place to go, which is Indy. But I said it was a win-win because Atlanta was able. I feel like that relationship has ran its course. Atlanta and Matt Ryan, they were able to trade him. They get, I think, a third-round pick, and they brought in Marcus Mariota. I think they understand that Marcus Mariota is not the long-term solution. And shouts out to Marcus Mariota, man. But he's not the long-term solution. Marcus Mariota isn't leading any team to a Super Bowl, and they also know that Atlanta still has a bad roster. Yes, you have Cordell Patterson, who plays like 5 positions. Yes, you have Kyle Pitts, but outside of that, you don't really have anything. So they understand that they're not really working with a lot. So you get a veteran in Marcus Mariota. You get a draft pick, and you're able to move off of Matt Ryan. Like that, it's a win-win. And of course, Matt Ryan. And now we'll talk about Matt Ryan and the Indianapolis side of things. Indy has been trying for a minute. Indy has had that belief that they're just a quarterback away. And they've had that belief for a minute, which is why they go with they felt like they've been a quarterback away, honestly, since a couple years after Andrew Luck retires, which is why they bring in Phillip Rivers, which is why they bring in Carson Wentz, and now which is why they bring in Matthew Stafford. I mean, not Matthew Stafford, I apologize. Bring in Matt Ryan. Do they know that Matt Ryan... Do I think that Matt Ryan can win a team a Super Bowl? At this stage of his career, no. And I think that the Indianapolis Colts know that. But I think Matt Ryan, in my opinion, at this point, is better than Carson Wentz.